Hey, everybody. Welcome to Monster Monday for November 30th, 2020. I'm your host, DM Gallibond, and I feel really bad. I feel really bad because I thought I had the microphone recording when I did this first time, but I didn't. So I just sat here and talked to chat for half an hour without the microphone on. Bad host. Bad host. All right. So we are going to try this all over again. Welcome to Monster Monday for November 30th, 2020. I'm your host, DM Gallibond, and tonight we are changing it up from what we have had the last few weeks, and we are talking about a beast, the Aurochs, and other herd beasts. What is an Aurochs? Well, if memory serves, in the real world, an Aurochs is a creature we know about from the fossil record. It's an extinct type of cattle. Um, I believe it lived in the same era as the woolly mammoth, and may have had a similar range distribution as the woolly mammoth. Uh, so it was slightly larger than modern uh, cattle and slightly woollier and hairier than modern cattle. Um, but in the D&D world, an aurochs is a sort of huge cattle that are often roam wild in the realms where D&D characters adventure. However, they have an interesting history. Now, the aurochs were not always wild. Originally, they were bred and trained to be fierce mounts from a young age. And aurochs are sacred symbols of Bagtru, the orc deity of unbridled strength. And a very interesting fact about aurochs is that no orc will eat such creatures because they are treated as honored warriors when they perish. This then gives us an interesting insight into how you might use an aurochs in a campaign. If your party is out ranging, adventuring, and they come across a an aurochs and they don't realize that it is somebody's property, but they are hungry and they butcher it and they eat it, and then they come to find out that this aurochs in fact belonged to a member of a tribe of orcs. Oh, buddy, guess what? Your party may have a death sentence on them from every orc within 100 miles. And that could be a real interesting way of introducing a low level antagonist to your campaign indirectly by having the party slay something that belongs to someone that's important to these orcs. And then the entire damn tribe of orcs. And all of the nations of orcs that are within 100 miles. Oh, yeah, we're coming after you. That could be kind of a real interesting way of uh, putting an aurochs into your campaign. So let's dig a little bit more into the lore for these aurochs. Bagtru is the son of Grumsh and Luthik, and as we said, he's the orc deity of unbridled strength. Legend says that Bagtru needed a mount as fierce as him for making war, so he sought a mighty aurochs, subjugated a creature with his bare hands, and hauled it to Nishrek, which is Grumsh's realm. And Bagtru named the beast Kazat, or bull in orc, and on Kazat's bareback, Bagtru charges into battle, ramming into an enemy host and leaping over the aurochs' horns to land in the midst of his foes. And orcs that revere Bagtru might tend a stable of war bulls that carry them into combat. So creature types are beasts. As we know, every monster in D&D has to have a creature type, and beasts are basically they're just kind of analogs of animals in the natural world. Now, some beasts are magical, but most beasts are non-magical, uh, don't have any kind of real form of communication, and they a lot of them are mammals, but they can also be reptiles, and they can be birds, they can be fishes, they can be insects, and they can be the normal garden variety versions of the beast, or they can be giant versions of the beast. So let's take a look at the mechanical features of Aurochs and where the Aurochs comes from in the lore of D&D. So the first place that the Aurochs is mentioned is they don't have a creature entry of their own, but in the first edition or AD&D Monster Manual, they are mentioned in the stat block of the bull. Uh, so uh, the Wild Ox and the Aurochs fall into this general class. They're armor class 7, 4 hit dice, 2 attacks, 1d6 per horn each. And then they are aggressive and easily aroused to anger. 75% chance of approach within 8 yards. The Aurochs will attack, and a charging bull does 3d4 points of damage upon impact with an additional 1d4 points of trampling damage. So that is damage over and above its normal attacks, and a charge has to cover at least 30 feet. Then the Aurochs kind of disappears and is not even referenced in the stat blocks of other animals all the way until we get to 5th edition. And this is where we find out in 5th edition about their connection to the orcs and Bagdru. They are 11 armor class 11 creatures, challenge rating 2, 38 hit points. They have a gore attack +7, which is pretty hefty attack, and they deal 2d8 +5 piercing damage. And if they charge, they have to charge at least 20 feet. And when they charge, they deal an extra 2d8 piercing damage, and the creature has to succeed on a strength save, or be knocked prone. So that's an additional feature of the animals in their charge. Okay, we looked here at the beasts, and basically, um, this just sort of reinforces that at the low level, a lot of the beasts are either herd animals, or they can be mystical fantasy versions of animals, like the Owl Mirage, which is the bunny rabbit that has the little unicorn horn on its head, or the Axe Beak, which is like a D&D version of a ostrich or something. Um, then you have some of the giant versions of animals. Let's see, where do we have the giant versions? Yeah, so we have all these giant bat, giant boar, giant centipede, giant crab, giant crayfish, giant elk, giant fly, yada yada yada. Frog. So yes, you can have beasts that are amphibians as well. And then you have some kind of unusual things. Two-headed crocodile. Um, you know, I don't know that there's ever been documented versions of two-headed crocodile, but I'm sure they must exist. Because you have, with some relative frequency. You find examples of two-headed snakes or two-headed lizards, which are also reptiles. So a two-headed crocodile um, doesn't seem completely out of the realm of possibility. Uh, might be, might be something that you would find from time to time. It's possible that they just aren't able to survive long enough for anybody to document them. All right, yeah, and so you have all of these other types of things that, you know, beasts and herd animals that you can use in your D&D game. All right, so let's go back to our slides. Now, how would you use an Aurochs in an encounter? I always like to try to think, how do I make a hard or challenging encounter with a particular creature against a party of 5 PCs of a certain level? So when you put a single Aurochs on the battlefield, um, that by itself is a hard challenge for a group of 5 level 1 PCs. If you bump the PCs up even to level 2, instead of becoming a medium challenge, it goes straight to an easy challenge. At level 3, it's so easy that in order to make it a hard challenge, you have to add another Aurochs. At level 2, if you added another Aurochs, you'd probably push it into a deadly encounter. So you might want to say something like, at level 2, instead of putting a second Aurochs there, put maybe another herd creature there, like an elk or something like that, or a giant elk. I think a giant elk is CR1. So maybe put the CR2 Aurochs and the CR1 giant elk side by side and have the party fight those. That could be a thing. Um, or, if you're using them like with their lore about the orcs, you could just have the Aurochs and you could have a number of orcs to fill up and make the encounter a hard encounter for uh, your party. All right, now where would you place these in campaigns? Using Aurochs in a campaign can be a little bit tricky. Okay, beasts can be great but tricky enemies for low-level parties. On their own, they are seldom malevolent, but perhaps there's an external force driving them to a frenzy or making them panic and stampede that threatens the party or nearby settlement. Now, there is a story out of I believe it's a story out of the New Testament where um, I'm going somewhere with this, but I'm going in reverse. The way the story goes in the scriptures is that there is a person, I believe it's somebody's child, that is possessed by an evil spirit. And there's a herd of swine there. And so the healing of the child is done by casting the demon out of the child and into the herd of swine. And it immediately makes the herd of swine panic, and they all go and throw themselves off the cliff into the river, and they drown. Now, if you think about D&D, what you might say is there's some sort of a rift in the abyss. And there's these demonic spirits that come out of the abyss. And oh, there just happens to be a herd of Aurochs there. And they go into the herd of Aurochs. And then they just whip up this frenzy of the herd of Aurochs. And the herd of Aurochs start charging at this village. And the people of the village have no defense except for the party members, who just happen to be there. Right place, wrong time. And this can especially be fun if you have players as individuals or players who play their characters to have an extreme affinity for animals. In my Sunday game, I've got an extremely fierce, very powerful half-orc barbarian who has a big soft spot for animals. I mean, such a big soft spot that he RP'd that his character was in a depressed funk because they had to kill a a griffin that was attacking them. Now there was no choice because there were several NPCs around, and these were like several commoner level NPCs, and the griffin wound up getting, its jaws on one of them, and just like shaking this poor NPC to death. And so the barbarian was actually forced to take up arms and kill the griffin. But oh, he was devastated by that. Now, uh, this is an example of somebody who really RPs their character well, because he has been RPing this every time they come to Beast, and he's consistent in the game. But in other games, he plays his characters different ways. That's one thing that can be fun, and it can be fun as a DM if you have somebody that you know is playing their character with a certain philosophy, and you can throw things at them that's going to challenge that philosophy and just see how committed that character is to the philosophy that they follow. Um, where it gets perhaps ethically, perhaps morally, where it gets a little bit more of a gray area is when you have a player, an actual player who has extreme views on, um, the sovereignty of creatures that are not sentient. And, you know, God knows we should all be environmentalists. We should all try to protect um, species and keep them from going extinct. Um, there are some people who get a little bit, you know, take that a little bit to the extreme. And if you have any of those players in your game, you might want to be careful about having a whole lot of fantasy violence against even fantasy creatures like beasts, because you might seriously give the player, not the character, but the player, you might give the player, some sort of existential crisis um, by watching you know, their fellow players do all this violence. They just may feel very uncomfortable with that. And I always think that as a DM, you want everybody to have fun. And if you're doing things that really are designed to um, put certain players, not characters, but put certain players into states of mental anguish, then maybe that's not the best thing to do. So, just know your players, understand how your players react to things before you decide you're going to have something pivotal where you're going to force the players to do something that might really be shocking or emotionally upsetting to one of them. All right, now how can you reskin the Aurochs? Well, do you think that the natural world is the only plane where beasts exist? I don't think so. Think about how an Aurochs would be. Same CR, same ability scores, same stat block in terms of the number of attacks. The only thing you would change mechanically would be the type of damage. And by changing the type of damage mechanically, that may give you some insight on how the the aesthetics or the appearance of the creature would change. So, what about on the astral plane? You know, there's astral rolling plains, right? So there's astral grasslands. So there's astral creatures that eat the astral grass, right? So why not have an astral aurochs? And instead of maybe its horns doing piercing damage, maybe its gore attack does radiant damage instead. And so, what would that look like? Would it be like a um, would it be something that looks like a bull, but its coat looks like a field of stars or something like that? Maybe it has glowing points on its horns. Then think about an ethereal steer in the ethereal plane. Um, Energy-based beasts on the elemental planes. What about an Aurochs on the plane of air? Where it looks like a steer, but it's this like coalesced lightning, arcing of lightning that just makes the form of a steer, and its attacks all deal lightning damage. Or on the elemental plane of Earth, it might be like um, a lava steer or an acid steer. I guess maybe it would be an acid steer on the elemental plane of Earth, and would be a lava steer on the elemental plane of fire. Uh, and then you could even have undead beasts in the Shadowfell. So all these are weird and wonderful different changes that you can make to the standard everyday beast to make it something more interesting for your players and put something in front of them that maybe they're not expecting to see. Because you go to the astral sea, who expects to fight, a bunch of damn cows on the on the astral plane? Hey, in your game, that might be exactly what your players get. Okay. Well, I don't see any questions, and that's not surprising since I've screwed up this one time through already, and people probably got tired of waiting for me to talk and watching silence. I'm going to go ahead into the wrap up in that case, and we will get you guys on your way. Um, so I have been DM Gallibond. This has been Monster Monday. You can find us here on Twitch 4 times a week, Mondays for Monster Monday. Then on Thursday evenings, I do the Sword Coast Chronicles. Saturday night, I do the Lost Mine of Original D&D. And Sunday afternoon, do the Walker of Waterdeep, which is the Planeswalking 5e campaign. Sword Coast Chronicles is a love letter to the existing 5e adventures, and Lost Mine of Original D&D is um, retelling the Lost Mine of Phandelver, but using original edition rules. So everything in there is original edition, and there's a lot of interesting changes on that. A lot of interesting changes on that. All right, that's gonna do it. And I'll wish you guys a good night. For all those of you who are watching at a future time, thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe. And if you're watching the archive on YouTube, click the post notification bell. If you are watching the archive on uh, Twitch, please follow and or subscribe to the channel. You'll get notifications about all of our upcoming content when you do that. And then over on YouTube, you can find all of the archives of everything that we do. And that's going to do it. So I'll close as I always do by just reminding you to watch out for the monsters under the bed. Good night, everyone.